A serapeum is a temple or other religious institution dedicated to the syncretic Greco-Egyptian deity Serapis, who combined aspects of Osiris and Apis in a humanized form that was accepted by the Ptolemaic Greeks of Alexandria. There were several such religious centers, each of which was a serapeion or, in its Latinized form, Serapeum. Egyptian Serapis, Alexandria, 31.18194 degrees north, 29.89694 degrees east, 31.18194, 29.89694. The Serapeum of Alexandria in the Ptolemaic Kingdom was an ancient Greek temple built by Ptolemy III Euergetes and dedicated to Serapis, who was made the protector of Alexandria. By all detailed accounts, the Serapeum was the largest and most magnificent of all temples in the Greek quarter of Alexandria. Besides the image of the god, the temple precinct housed an offshoot collection of the Great Library of Alexandria. The geographer Strabo tells that this stood in the west of the city. Nothing now remains above ground. Excavations at the site of the Column of Diocletian in 1944 yielded the foundation deposits of the Serapeion. These are two sets of 10 plaques, one each of gold, silver, bronze, Egyptian faience, sun-dried Nile mud, and 5 of opaque glass. The inscription that Ptolemy III Euergetes built the Serapeion in Greek and Egyptian marks all plaques. Evidence suggests that Parmenas was assigned as architect. The foundation deposits of a temple dedicated to Harpocrates from the reign of Ptolemy IV Philopator were also found within the enclosure walls. Subterranean galleries beneath the temple were most probably the site of the mysteries of Serapis. In 1895, a black diorite statue representing Serapis in his Apis bull incarnation with the sun disk between his horns was found at the site. An inscription dates it to the reign of Hadrian. Destruction of the Alexandrian Serapeum. The Serapeum in Alexandria was destroyed by a Christian crowd of Roman soldiers in 391. Several conflicting accounts for the context of the destruction of the Serapeum exist. According to early Christian sources, Bishop Pope Theophilus of Alexandria was the Nicene Patriarch when the decrees of Emperor Theodosius I forbade public observances of any rites but Christian. Theodosius I had progressively made the sacred feasts of other faiths into workdays, forbidden public sacrifices, closed temples, and colluded in acts of local violence by Christians against major cult sites. The decree promulgated in 391 that no one is to go to the sanctuaries, walk through the temples, resulted in the abandonment of many temples throughout the empire, which set the stage for widespread practice of converting or replacing these sites with Christian churches. In Alexandria, Bishop Theophilus obtained legal authority over one such forcibly abandoned temple of Dionysus, which he intended to turn into a church. During the renovations, the contents of subterranean spaces were uncovered and profaned, which allegedly incited crowds of non-Christians to seek revenge. The Christians retaliated, as Theophilus withdrew, causing the pagans to retreat into the Serapeum, still the most imposing of the city's remaining sanctuaries, and to barricade themselves inside, taking captured Christians with them. These sources report that the captives were forced to offer sacrifices to the banned deities, and that those who refused were tortured and ultimately cast into caves that had been built for blood sacrifices. The trapped pagans plundered the Serapeum. A letter was sent by Theodosius to Theophilus, asking him to grant the offending pagans pardon and calling for the destruction of all pagan images. suggesting that these were at the origin of the commotion. Consequently, the Serapeum was leveled by Roman soldiers and monks called in from the desert, as were the buildings dedicated to the Egyptian god Canopus. The wave of destruction of non-Christian idols spread throughout Egypt in the following weeks, as documented by a marginal illustration on papyrus from a world chronicle written in Alexandria in the early 5th century, which shows Theophilus in triumph. The cult image of Serapis, crowned with the modius, is visible within the temple at the bottom. A slightly different version of this account of the destruction of the Serapeum begins with Bishop Theophilus closing down the Mithraeum, rather than the temple of Dionysus. The details of the ensuing profanation and insinuation of human sacrifices substantially agree. An alternate account of the incident is found in writings by Eunuppus, the pagan historian of later Neoplatonism. Here, an unprovoked Christian mob successfully used military-like tactics to destroy the Serapeum and steal anything that may have survived the attack. According to Eunuppus, the remains of criminals and slaves who had been occupying the Serapeum at the time of the attack were appropriated by non-Christians, placed in pagan temples, and venerated as martyrs. Whichever the cause, the destruction of the Serapeum, described by Christian writers Tyrannius Rufinus and Cizomon, was but the most spectacular of such conflicts. According to Peter Brown, several other ancient and modern authors, instead, have interpreted the destruction of the Serapeum in Alexandria as representative of the triumph of Christianity and an example of the attitude of the Christians towards pagans. However, Peter Brown frames it against a long-term backdrop of frequent mob violence in the city, where the Greek and Jewish quarters had fought during 400 years, since the 1st century BCE. Also, Eusebius mentions street fighting in Alexandria between Christians and non-Christians, occurring as early as 249. There is evidence that non-Christians had taken part in city-wide struggles both for and against Athanasius of Alexandria, in 341 and 356. Similar accounts are found in the writings of Socrates of Constantinople. R. Macmullen further reports that, in 363, George of Cappadocia was killed for his repeated acts of pointed outrage, insult, and pillage of the most sacred treasures of the city. Whatever the prior events, the Serapeum of Alexandria was not rebuilt. Saqqara Canopus. Another Serapeum was located at Canopus, in the Nile Delta near Alexandria. This sanctuary, dedicated to Isis and her consort Serapis, became one of the most famous cult centers of the Ptolemaic Kingdom and Roman Egypt. Its festivals and rites were so popular that the site became an architectural model for sanctuaries to the Egyptian gods throughout the Roman Empire. At this Greco-Roman site, a sacred temenos enclosed the temple dedicated to the gods, which was located behind a propylaea or peristyle court. Auxiliary shrines dedicated to other, less universal, Egyptian deities could be found here as well, including those dedicated to Anubis, Hermes Trismegistus, the syncretism of Thoth and Hermes, Harpocrates, and others. Ritual complexes dedicated to Isis were often built around a well or a spring, which was meant to represent the miraculous annual inundation of the Nile. This was also the case in sanctuaries devoted to the Egyptian gods in Roman-era Delos, where a central basin provided the water element central in the rites of Isis. Serapi in Italy. Regio Tertia. The Regio III within the city of Rome was named Isis a Serapis because it contained a temple dedicated to the two Egyptian deities. The structure, originally dedicated to Isis alone, was built by Quintus Caecilius Metellus Pius in the first half of the 1st century BCE to celebrate his father's victory over Jugurtha. The complex, of which only parts of the foundations remain, was originally terraced. During the Flavian dynasty, it underwent major renovations, and the cult of Serapis was associated to that of Isis. The temple was finally demolished during the 6th century. Campus Martius. This temple, dedicated to Isis and Serapis, was first dedicated by the Triumvirs in 43 BCE in Rome. However, due to later tensions between Octavian and Mark Antony, the temple was not built. Following the battle at Actium, Augustus banned the religion from within the Pomerium of Rome altogether. The temple was finally built by Gaius Caligula on the area known as Campus Martius, between the Septa Julia and the Temple of Minerva circa 3741 CE. The Serapeum, 240 meters long and 60 meters wide, was divided in 3 sections. A rectangular area could be accessed first by walking under monumental arches. An open square, adorned with red granite obelisks brought to the city during the 1st century and erected in couples, followed. The center of the square was likely occupied by the temple dedicated to Isis, while the third section, a semicircular exedra with an apse, presumably hosted the altar dedicated to Serapis. Fragments of the obelisks, some quite large, have been found around the current church of Santa Maria sopra Minerva. Some archaeologists have proposed that the obelisk facing the Pantheon may have been repositioned from the temple to its current location. The building was destroyed in the Great Fire of the year 80 CE and rebuilt by Domitian. Further renovation was initiated by Hadrian, while Septimius Severus ordered the necessary upkeep of the temple structure. Written records attest to the Serapeum's existence and ritual activity until the 5th century. Quirinal Hill. The temple built on Quirinal Hill and dedicated to Serapis was, by most surviving accounts, the most sumptuous and architectonically ambitious of those built on the hill. Its remains are still visible between Palazzo Colonna and the Pontifical Gregorian University. The sanctuary, which lay between today's Piazza della Pilata and the large square facing Quirinal Palace, was built by Caracalla on the western slopes of the hill, covering over 13,000 square meters, as its sides measured 135 meters by 98 meters. It was composed by a long courtyard and by the ritual area, where statues and obelisks had been erected, designed to impress its visitors. The temple boasted columns 21.17 meters tall and 2 meters in diameter, visually sitting atop a marble stairway that connected the base of the hill to the sanctuary. An enormous fragment of entablature, weighing approximately 100 tons and 34 cubic meters in volume, belongs to the original temple, as do the statues of the Nile and the Tiber, moved by Michelangelo to the Capitoline Hill in front of the Senate building. Hadrian's villa. Emperor Hadrian ordered the construction of a canopus in his villa in Tivoli with typical imperial grandeur. An immense rectangular tank representing a canal, 119 meters long by 18 meters wide, was surrounded by porticos and statues, leading the way to a Serapeum, protected by a monumental dome. The sanctuary was composed of a public area and a more intimate subterranean part that was dedicated to the chthonic aspect of Serapis. To mark the inauguration of his temple, Hadrian struck coinage that carry his effigy accompanied by Serapis, upon a dais where 2 columns support a round canopy. In this manner, the emperor became Sinaus, a companion of the gods Arcane, Nous, an equal beneficiary of the cult of Serapis at Canopus. Ostia Antiqa. The Serapeum of Ostia Antiqa was inaugurated in 127 CE and dedicated to the syncretic cult of Jupiter Serapis. Serapis. It is a typical Roman sanctuary on a raised platform and with a row of columns at the entrance, where a mosaic representing Apis in a typically Egyptian manner can still be seen. For this temple likely came the statute that Bryaxis copied for the Serapeum in Alexandria. Pozzuoli. The Macellum of Pozzuoli marketplace, a Macellum of the Roman city of Puteoli, was first excavated in the 18th century, when the discovery of a statue of Serapis led to the building being misidentified as the city's Serapeum, the Temple of Serapis. Under that name, the site had considerable influence on early geology, as a band of boreholes affecting the three standing columns suggested that the building had been partly below sea level for some period. Serapi in Turkey. Pergamon. Inside Pergamon in Bergama, there is the Temple of Serapis, built for the Egyptian gods in the 2nd century CE and called the Red Basilica by locals. This is a basilica-shaped building constructed under the reign of Hadrian. It consists of a main building and two round towers. In the Christian New Testament, the church at Pergamon, inside the main building of the Red Basilica, is listed as one of the 7 churches to which the Book of Revelation was addressed. Ephesus. Another Serapeum was in Ephesus, which is near present-day Selçuk, Izmir province, Turkey. The temple is located behind the Library of Celsus. This Egyptian temple was turned into a Christian church. Miletus. This temple was built in the 3rd century BCE near the South Agra of Miletus, and also it was restored by Emperor Julius Aurelius.